So I've been asked to speak English, and we just fall asleep. My name is Andrey Akselrod. I'm CTO of PEOPLE.AI. Prior to PEOPLE.AI, I've co-founded and was a CTO of SmartWing. Both companies have offices here in Ukraine. So let me talk about PEOPLE.AI high level first, and then we dive into some of the highlights of lessons learned to date. So let's start by acknowledging some of the transformation that's been happening. And the numbers are actually very interesting. 375 million of people going to be affected. Their nature of work is going to change over the next 10 years or so. Now, the number that is even more staggering is that 52% of companies in Fortune 500 has disappeared since 2000. Those are the biggest companies that are out there, and half of them disappeared. And all of that is due to the result of digital disruption. So let's take a look at what's happening. So over the last 100 years or so, here's what happened in manufacturing. Let's take a look at the cars. 1886, the first cars were created, and in order to build those cars, you have to hire a lot of experts who knew how to build cars from soup to nuts, right? Completely, from the ground up. But the cars were expensive, and you could build just a few of those cars. Then, in 1913, Henry Ford invented the assembly line. And what happened is, all of a sudden, you no longer needed you no longer needed a lot of experts to build cars. You could hire a lot of people who were not experts, and actually you could do a lot more cars at the same time. Cars became significantly less expensive at that point. Then, sort of in the mid-century, Japanese started to replace people with robots. And then nowadays, robots are making robots that are making cars. So all of this happened over the last 100 years or so. So let's take a look at what happened with the office work at this point. So it all started with notepads, right? People just were writing stuff down. Then we got some tools to help us deal with routine work. However, the tools are not really keeping up. So when we look at the office work, not much was happening for a long time. And now we're sort of entering the premise of artificial intelligence, and all of a sudden, things are starting to change. So let's take a look at the simple example, Gmail. So who uses Gmail? I'm just curious. Is that going to be everyone? Okay, it's everyone. Okay, so you guys know what I'm talking about. I actually find it pretty cool and useful the way that it does it. So if we look at the more complicated example, and this is an example of something that PEOPLE.AI does really, really well. So this is an example of Salesforce form. And this is what salespeople have to deal with. They're filling out forms like this. This is truly ridiculous. And salespeople spend roughly 30% of their time doing this. Think about it, right? Highly paid sales reps that are simply wasting 30% of their time doing data entry. This is what's going on now. So PEOPLE.AI is taking all of that away, and we're using AI to automate a lot of that. So if we look at PEOPLE.AI vision, we are allowing people, we enable people to focus on the creative aspects of their work, and by getting AI to do all the boring and repetitive stuff. How do we make this vision a reality, right? What happened was PEOPLE.AI. So PEOPLE.AI is, to give you some context, we're a 3-year-old company. We've raised some serious venture capital in the last 3 years. And it all started as usual. It all started with a cup of coffee in hand. I'm not sure what it is about starting startups in the cafes. I've started Smartling, my previous company, in a cafe in New York with a cup of coffee, and I kid you not. Oleg, who is the founder of PEOPLE.AI and founder and CEO of PEOPLE.AI, started PEOPLE.AI in a cafe as well. So he was sitting with his friend, who's the CTO and founder of a major security company. And they had a conversation. And in the process of that conversation, he actually said to Oleg, why don't you start your own company? And he literally wrote a blank check for $150,000 and said, if you start the company now, if you text your CEO, resign, this is your check, and go start the company. To which Oleg agreed, sent a text to his CEO, and this was the start of PEOPLE.AI. So, talking about Oleg, he always believed that sales reps are not working efficiently. He's coming from a sales background. He experienced it himself, so it was really close to his heart. That was, one belief, and the other belief is that the data analysis of the activities of what people do, which is emails, calls, calendars, could be really, really useful. So, having said that, it took a couple of pivots. Let me ask you guys another question. Who remembers Cloud Score? Seriously? 2 people? Everyone is so young here, it looks like. It was just a couple of years that Cloud Score is no longer with us. But essentially it was a framework that would give you a score. You would log into your social networks, and it would give you your social score, right? So one of the first ideas that we had, one of the first ideas, it was to do Cloud Score for sales reps. So that idea did not survive for long, just like the Cloud Score didn't. But going into our sort of lesson learned along the way, right? It will take a couple of pivots. It's okay. So very quickly after that, PEOPLE.AI got to Y Combinator. And one of the things that Y Combinator really pushes you to figure out is your product market fit. So what do you have to do? You have to talk to your 100 potential customers within a week. And you need to figure out how to do it. And as you're talking to them, you need to figure out what their pain points are. So if you do the math, 100 prospect interviews within a week, you don't even have a 30-minute slot to do an interview. So you really need to figure out how to optimize it. And the other part of that, you can't really think about what you're doing. It's just literally you're making call one after another. And that produces interesting results. So, going to lesson number 2 is, what problem do you solve and who do you solve it for? Which is, this is something that YC really drills into you, that you have to answer those questions. When you're asking the questions, we naturally sort of try to ask the question, does this look interesting? And guess what? Whatever you do, whatever you're trying to do, the answer is going to be always, oh yeah, that looks different, that looks interesting. People do not want to disappoint you. It's a really, really bad question. Instead, what you could ask is like D2C, how much would you pay for it? And this is a much more insightful question. One of the good questions for us, for PEOPLE.AI, is what would you do differently based on what you just saw, right? So we're delivering people some reports, we're delivering some data. is that data interesting, or would you do something based on that data? Would you act on it? And then it communicates volumes. So some of the proof points that you can get is after selling the idea to the customer and after getting this initial interest, are they willing to co-develop with you? Have you sold them enough that they cannot wait for you to release the solution to their problem so much that they're willing to spend like 30 minutes weekly or a couple of weeks with you to sort of for you to give them an update and ask more of their opinion? Another proof point is when you do a beta launch, do you have any beta customers? Do you have any customers that are willing to launch with you, right? And if you've sold them properly, you actually will. And if you all of a sudden find that you're struggling to find your beta customer, that's your answer. You did not do the homework the right way. So by the end of YC, we had about 50 paying customers. We raised Series A. And shortly thereafter, we realized that our product market fit is with large companies, large enterprises. So let's talk about how you transition the engineering team after you find product market fit. So pre-product market fit, what you do is you do a ton of experiments. See what works, what doesn't, what sticks, what doesn't stick. You throw a lot of code out. There is absolutely no process. Process is usually in the way of what you're doing. And there is one thing that matters, is how fast you move. Your engineering team looks like really a special ops team that I always imagine them going through the jungle with the axes, creating a path for themselves. So that's what your engineering team looks like early on. Once you start to achieving product market fit, you need to completely transition. You need to build a foundation for your software. You need to establish the right processes for engineering. And all of a sudden, your engineering team looks like not a small special ops team, right? All of a sudden, it looks like regular army, right? And you need to be able to move a lot of people in sync at the same time. So it looks very, very different than your special ops team. If you fail to do this, I would typically give a startup between 6 and 9 months to leave. And then, actually, this is where a lot of companies die. Because what happens is, you're starting with achieving product market fit, you're starting to get a lot of customers, and the customers want features. And what your engineering team does is actually does a lot of firefighting. There's no foundation, the stuff doesn't really work. And they don't have time to build new features, and they don't have time to build a foundation. So this is a very important aspect to be aware of. So far, we've talked about a lot of different things, but this is an AI conference last time I checked. So one of the questions actually that we're being asked is, where's AI in PEOPLE.AI, right? It took us 1 year that we did not have any machine learning. We did not really have any AI. And guess what? It's totally fine, even though you have AI in the name of your company. So that brings me to lesson 4. Start with a skateboard. You don't need machine learning day one. Not only that, you probably don't have enough data to start with to do any machine learning day one. So why am I talking about skateboard? This is actually a pretty famous picture. Can I see some hands who saw this picture before? Okay. Roughly like half of you saw this picture before. Let's talk about it a little bit. Let's say you need to get from Kiev to Odessa, right? How do you do it? So you brainstorm and you are like, well, you know what? Airplane is a good way to get from Kiev to Odessa. So what you do is you start building the airplane. And guess what? Building the airplane is hard, right? You need to know physics. So the alternative to that is you start walking. You leave Kiev and start walking to Odessa. And as you walk, you realize, hey, how do I accelerate? How do I move faster? And you're like, well, what's the simplest thing that I can do to move faster? It's a skateboard. So you make the skateboard. All of a sudden, you're moving faster. It's not enough. You're not going to get to where you need to get, but you're moving faster. And then you are like, okay, but what's the next thing I can do to accelerate? You put a handle on a skateboard, and you go a little faster in turns, feels more stable, starting to move faster again. And you're like, okay, but what if I create a bicycle? What's going to happen? So you go with a bicycle, and all of a sudden, you're getting there a lot faster, but you're still not quite there. Motorcycle, all of a sudden you arrive to a car. And the car, actually you realize that the car is enough to get you from Kiev to Odessa, right? So if we go back to the top of the picture here, building the airplane, what I would call in engineering terms is over-engineering. You don't really need one to get to Odessa, right? All you need is a car, and this is a much better way to get there. Now, speaking about AI, speaking about machine learning in general, right? What you do, and we did a lot of this in the first year, is you first of all, you solve the pain point manually. You understand that you become an expert in what you're doing, right? Then once you understand what you're doing, you transform your learnings into rules-based code. It's a lot of if-then statements, if-then else, decision trees, but it's still rules-based. And that is likely to get you 70 to 80% to where you need to go, right? Remember the discovery that you did with the customers? You're solving their problem. You're not solving arbitrary machine learning stuff. And only then, once you have this 70 to 80% solution, you can use machine learning to start the remaining 20 to 30%. So in 1 year, in PEOPLE.AI, we have a few data scientists, but there's still no centralized data science team. So we're like, how do we move forward? And we're okay, we need to hire a head of data science. Took us 9 months to find the right person. So the bottom line here is start thinking about hiring your head of data science earlier than you think you're going to need one. As you start interviewing people, at least what we found is that there are a lot of people who are theoretical researchers, that they're good at what they do, they're good at AI, they're good at machine learning. What they're not good at is getting their concepts into production. And that was critical for us, as is probably going to be critical for every other company in here, unless we have Google, Facebook, and a couple of other ones in the audience. What do data scientists look for? They're looking for two things, really. They're looking for interesting data to play with, and they're looking for easy access to the data. So at PEOPLE.AI, we actually have data that is very, very interesting. We have the activity data. This is what people do, emails, calls, calendars. The insights that you could get from the data like this is actually incredible. And then at the same time, we have very little red tape while satisfying all the privacy requirements that we have to satisfy working with large companies. So on the opposite side, what to look for in the head of data science. And first and foremost, and I cannot emphasize this more, they must be pragmatic. Let Googles of the world do the research. You need practical implications of data science. You have tough competition for talent. It's tough in Silicon Valley. It's tough here in Kiev, in Ukraine in general. You have to find someone who knows how to hire people. Strong background in engineering data science, strong philosophy on how product engineering and data science communicate and work together with one another. And then it's someone who has built and maintained a good data science roadmap. Remember I told you about the importance of hiring pragmatic data scientists? So here's why. So your data science team releases your model to production. Do you guys think you are done at that point? It's out there, it works. So when you look at end-to-end data science or machine learning in academia, what you see is data is constant, labels are constant, product is constant, nothing really changes. You're trying to optimize for one metric. It's a very typical approach. Guess what? It does not work like this in real life at all. So there's nothing that is constant. The data is different from yesterday to today. Customers may have significant variety between customer to customer. Labels may change over time. As you evolve your product, the same input yesterday and today may produce different output. So there is nothing that is constant about it. Metrics. Acting on the wrong metric, optimizing for the wrong metric, can actually kill your product. Now, one example that I have is, let's say we are in an e-commerce site and we generate recommendations for products, right? And if, for example, you can have a metric that you absolutely have to have a recommendation, whether it's good or not, but you absolutely have to have it. And this is an example of a really wrong metric because you need some trust with the customers, and they look at that product and they're looking at the suggestions that are completely irrelevant. They're not trusting you, right? Getting your model to production is only part of the work to get done. You need to continuously monitor the data. You need to ensure that your inputs and outputs are correct over time. But there is even more to it. Is right. Even how do you select the right algorithm if you have multiple approaches? And one of the things that I would suggest is to consider explainability in addition to your typical metrics. Fortune tellers, right? So what you don't want to do is when explaining to your customer, and customers would want an explanation, especially in the B2B world. It's a little bit easier in B2C, people are used to this at this point, but in B2B, customers are gonna want to know how your product works and why it generated those results. And guess what, if you have a big black box of a machine learning models, and they produce the results, you can't explain it, right? So your customers are not gonna trust it. And they're not going to trust you. So at PEOPLE.AI, customer trust is actually, we're really, really big on this. We need to build our customer trust. We need our customers to trust us. We're delivering data to them, and they need to be able to trust that data. You will make mistakes. It's inevitable. So understanding what's going on inside and being able to explain it in a way that customers understand is really, really important. One of the questions for PEOPLE.AI is like, why is this data in my CRM? Like, what happened? Why is it there? And if we have a big black box, we can't explain it. So this is another benefit to sort of making rule-based systems first, and then continue to optimize them in various ways. Every time that you're thinking about model accuracy and explainability, it really could be at like a different ratio of what you're trying to achieve, right? So for example, deep learning, right, may generate the best results out there, but it could be the hardest to explain. Simpler ML techniques may get you lower accuracy, but it could be more explainable. And this is actually something you may want to optimize for anyway, even though your results may not be as good as with some other approaches. As I said, we started with rule-based approach, which is very, very explainable. You know exactly what you're doing and you can explain it perfectly. And actually, customer trust is one of those really good metrics that you could optimize for. So, especially in the data businesses, if you deliver data, the value of that data is not always obvious. So for example, one of the things that we do is, again, I mentioned before, we update Salesforce automatically. Now, especially in large enterprises, you go to customers and especially like during the renewal, you want to renew the contract, and they're like, what do you do again? Like, no one monitors Salesforce for updates. The data magically appears, right? You want to renew, and they're like, who the hell are you, right? So, very, very important to communicate the value of what you're doing to the customer. And with large companies, you can't work one-on-one with the customer. Your users, the people who are buying your product, not necessarily your users. There are a lot of users who are using your product. It's impossible to communicate with them one-on-one. So it's really, you need to encode your product to scale the value communication to your customer. And one of the things that you need to do, and I know it's hard for engineers here, is to communicate value in business metrics, not in engineering metrics. So some simple examples here. Let's say if we say PEOPLE.AI has generated 2,000 contacts. What the hell does it mean? Okay, great, they have 2,000 contacts. What do I do with them? If we say the same thing as PEOPLE.AI has affected 70% of your sales pipeline this quarter, all of a sudden this is like, oh, holy shit moment, right? It's like, I'm making money on PEOPLE.AI. Job change tracking, I'm not even sure what I was trying to say here. With recall 75% and precision 98%, right? This is a very data science-y metric, and we actually do this all the time. This is how we, from engineering standpoint, we measure what we do. Again, communicates absolutely nothing to the customer. So something like 10 new leads per quarter generated based on us tracking as people change their jobs is actually much more understandable. So let's recap, and we may be over the time at this point. I don't know, we started a little late, but it will take a couple of pivots. What problem do you solve and for whom? Transition engineering after the product market fit. Start with a skateboard, that's my favorite one. Hired head of data science earlier. Get real, things are changing over time. You have to explain what you do, and you have to communicate the value to the customer. Now, if there is one thought that I want to leave with you guys today, is this. Remember the most important lesson of this whole presentation? Every startup starts with coffee. So there is we have a PEOPLE.AI coffee point on the first floor, and you'll find it easily. You will see PEOPLE.AI there somewhere on the wall. I actually didn't have a chance to go there and check, so I can't describe it accurately. I'm gonna attempt to do coffee training at 11:40 during our coffee break. I don't know if it's gonna work and how many people are gonna show up, but if you're interested, stop by. Any questions? How are we doing on time, guys? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, so we have some time for questions, is there any? We doing mics, or what are we doing?
Давайте поблагодарим Андрея за выступление. Теперь есть прекрасная возможность задать вопросы. Кто хочет, поднимайте ручку, буду к вам подходить.
Thank you, Andrey, for a great presentation. Incredible pivots, all looks fantastic. I have a couple of questions for you. So I cannot be more agree that transition of engineering team from early days to late days is difficult. How many people survived?
It's a good question. For PEOPLE.AI, it was about 50%.
Thank you. And second question I have is from the business standpoint. You selling to the large customers, as I can understand. It's hard and it takes time, especially with the AI products. Like, how do you handle this, and what the length of your normal sales cycle is?
So selling to large enterprises is actually pretty difficult. I'd say I would even consider it to be a competitive advantage of a startup, knowing how to sell to big companies. So we sell to what we call enterprise and strategic. Strategic are like really huge companies, like think IBM, Hewlett Packard, Red Hat, and so forth. Enterprise are still big companies, but not quite as big for us in our classification. The sales cycle for enterprise is actually pretty good. We're looking at 3 to 4 months. The sales cycle for strategic customers is, I would say, 9 to 12. This can become painful because companies are measured quarter by quarter, and it's actually very difficult to sustain that when large customers are paying you they're paying you millions, right? But it's very hard to deal with 9 to 12 month sales cycles in that area.
Thank you. Probably that's where the funding kicks in.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's quite exciting. I have 2 quick questions. First one is, what is the proportion between engineers and AI people? Because you mentioned that AI people is less important, or when you realize what proportion is okay? And second question, how quick can you scale and how you do this technically? Because you land big clients, small clients, and how quick and what are the technology you're using for scaling your backend and be able to get more data from your clients?
Okay. So the first question, when is your talk? 4 p.m.?
Yes.
So let me advertise your talk for us. At 4 p.m. you guys are going to hear a lot more about the ratios of data scientists and the rest of the engineering team.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be much more interesting than anything I have to say on the topic. Having said that, as you were talking about it, I was trying to calculate it in my head, and I think right now the ratio is roughly 6 to 1. 1 person in data science team versus 6 on the engineering side. You tell me if it's the right ratio or not. Looking forward to see your presentation. The second part is how do you scale? So I think scale is sort of a function of time. As you look at a young company, especially as it was probably trying to find product market fit, and then it was essentially rebooted to build the right foundation. It's not easy, guys. It's difficult. I've done it a couple of times. It takes time. So what you need to do is essentially create a plan for the year. It's a company plan. It's how many customers you are planning to acquire, how many users you're going to have, so you plan it out, and then you back off from those numbers to build your technology to ensure that you can scale by those points. This is a sort of more of a product track, not a super technical track, so I don't want to bore people with a lot of technical details. One last thought that I'm going to leave you with is that scaling people and scaling teams is more difficult than scaling technology. And what I would think first is how do you scale the teams? And only then I would think about how to scale the technology, because your team is going to scale the technology.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. And you mentioned that when hiring a head of data science, this person needs to be pragmatic. Could you be more specific? How did you check this? What do you mean pragmatic, and how you check it during interviews?
So the best way to do interviews is to ask behavioral questions, right? It's about what they've done before and how they've done it, right? And those are the best questions that allow you to learn what this person is about. And if when talking about the past, only talking about how great their 12 months long projects were, you know that they're not very pragmatic or practical, right? Because we're talking about quick iterations, and even though we all know it's data science, right? Not everything is going to work. It's okay. We're gonna experiment a lot. Some of it is going to work, and some of it is not. There are no guarantees. But at the end, you see the mindset. Is he thinking about getting to production as quickly as possible? While acknowledging that this is not a sure deal to get there? Great. A lot of people are going to talk about 6 to 12 months projects and be very excited about that.
Thank you for your great talk. I was also wondering, what does the people in data science team do? Do they deploy to prod? Also, do the deployments to prod, or is it more purely research related stuff?
So we do not have research people at all. Everyone in our data science team is, highly technical from the engineering aspects of things, and most people, everyone on our data science team actually very hands-on from engineering standpoint.
Есть ли еще желающие задать вопросы? Супер. Давайте тогда еще раз поблагодарим Андрея за выступление.